Hi everyone, David Aragona here with the October 9th edition of Horses to Watch, taking a look back at some replays from last week, trying to find some horses that encountered adversity in their trips and could be worth betting back in the future. Well, if you've been following the show since we got to Aqueduct, plenty of track bias is popping up on both courses. Luckily, this past week, the dirt track seemed pretty fair overall. We'll talk about one dirt race, but I don't think track bias had really much to do with the results from this past week. But we've continued to see a situation on the turf courses at Aqueduct where you really are benefited from staying on the inside toward the rail. Somewhat surprisingly, wherever they set the rail, because the rail settings have moved around every single week, but it still seems like you want to be inside to have your best chance. And that's generally the case with turf racing. The turns are a little tighter, the courses are shorter, so saving ground is of greater importance. But I think we've been seeing something that goes a little beyond that at Aqueduct, where entire trifectas, entire superfectas are comprised of horses that rode the rails for their entire trips. And I think that's when you start to cross over into a biased territory. We'll talk about some races that could have been affected by track bias. Actually, leading off with one of those as we dive right into the first replay from last Thursday, October 3rd, race 7. It was actually the stakes on the card, the Goop Ponte stakes, going 1 mile on the inner turf course for 3-year-olds. We'll break these runners from the gate. The inner turf course with the rails that were out of ways, but still seemed like we had the bias that we've grown accustomed to seeing wherever they place the rails on this inner turf course. And the number 11 Vesting, I think, is the horse that was most against the track of anybody in this race. And this is actually one of those races that I was referring to where an entire superfecta is comprised of horses that rode the rail for the majority of their trips. And Vesting is a horse that really never had a chance to get inside at any point in this race. He was the number 11. We highlighted him coming out of the far outside post position. Flavien Prat, I think, does what he has to do early in this race by taking this horse back to try to get him over towards the inside, but he's never able to get closer to the rail than the two path. And when you do have a situation where the rail is an advantage, even racing in the two path could be a slight disadvantage. And it just gets a little bit worse for Vesting from here because you can see he got a little bit keen heading onto the backstretch. He is a horse that has a lot more natural speed than he's been allowed to show in his last couple of starts. His race just prior to this at Saratoga, he was actually taken back and somewhat compromised by a slow pace. This race didn't feature necessarily a pace that was very slow, but it was dominated on the front end by inside horses. And as I was suggesting, check out the number 2, number 9, number 4, and number 10. Those are the superfecta finishers, and they're all right in a line on the inside. And actually, Vesting is the horse that does the best of those who did not ride the rail around that far turn. You could see him highlighted there. He's swinging about 4 to 5 wide at the top of the stretch to try to make a run. And it seemed like he had some run to give at that point, but all the best running is being done by those horses that were down towards the inside, cutting the corner at the quarter pole, and nobody can catch the eventual winner, Donegal Momentum, who not only was able to ride the rail the entire way, but was able to set a pace that was very comfortable for him up towards the front end. So there just was not a whole lot of closing going on, especially not by horses that were racing off the rail the entire time. That was Vesting for sure. Like I said, he's a horse that's been somewhat compromised by trips twice in a row. I think he's a horse for Chad Brown that has not yet shown the best that he has to offer. And if he gets into a better scenario next time out, I think we'll see this horse take a big step forward for the Brown Barn. Let's move on to the only dirt race that we're going to show on this week's episode. It was from Friday, October 4th, so that the 6th race of the day, an allowance first level going 6 furlongs for Phillies and Mars. Let's break these runners from the gate. We're going to focus on the number 1, Kid's Last Laugh. This was a horse coming off a layoff for trainer Rick Dutrow, having not raced since last March at Aqueduct. And you can see for a horse that typically closes from off the pace, she actually breaks pretty well and is up there contesting the pace for a brief moment before the eventual winner, the number 4 Golden Degree, just spurts away from this field. There was another horse in this race who was supposed to show speed, the number 7, who has the ability to be a lot more forward than her rider asked her to be, but it turned out that nobody pressed this eventual winner, Golden Degree, who was out there carving some legitimate fractions on the front end. So I don't think anybody was necessarily fast enough to take the lead away from her, but you can see the leader starts to ratchet up the pace around the far turn. It's just a little bit too quick for the number 1 Kid's Last Laugh to handle, and she goes from second place to getting shuffled all the way back to last by the time they get to the quarter pole, that's usually pretty discouraging for a horse, especially on the dirt where they start to take that kickback. And you can see at the top of the stretch here, she's going to try to make a rally, but she's going to try to angle outside of this horse here to her. In front of her, has to angle back towards the inside. These are just minor issues that usually take away from a horse's ability to finish off a race. But Kid's Last Laugh is actually going to finish very well across the finish line. It just missed second by a length. And you'll see as we continue rolling on the gallop out, she's really building up a head of steam as they come across the wire. And she's actually going to gallop out all the way ahead of the winner by the time they move into the clubhouse turn. That is her coming into the picture right there. And you can see she still has some run to give as they move on around that clubhouse turn, running past that eventual winner, Golden Degree. Now, I don't want to make too much of a gallop out. I think sometimes it's more important for very lightly raced horses than it is for an experienced runner like this. But I just think we've seen an attribute from Kid's Last Laugh to really finish off her dirt sprints very strong. You can see it when you look at her past performances, especially focusing on her Timeform US pace figures. It's unusual to see a dirt horse with a rising Timeform US pace figure line in dirt sprints. What I mean by that is a horse that has a final pace figure that is significantly higher than the preceding pace figures when you look at the Timeform USPPs. And Kid's Last Laugh has done that in her last two dirt races, a final pace figure that is 10 points higher than the preceding one, indicating that she is finishing off her dirt races with a lot more speed than most horses do, given those similar pace situations. So I think Kid's Last Laugh ran a deceptively strong race first off the layoff here. And if she can find herself in a spot where there's a slightly more competitive pace ahead of her next time out, going a dirt sprint distance, I think she'll be much more effective. Let's move back over to the turf course for one more replay to take a look at from last Saturday, October 5th. This was the last race of the day, race 12, maiden claiming 40,000, going a mile and a 16th back on that inner turf course. Now, note they had moved the rails down to 0 feet for the weekend, so not the same rail setting as we saw on Thursday for that Goop Ponte Stakes, but still a situation where you felt like the inside was the best place to be. We'll talk about it as we take a look at this replay, breaking them from the gate, and focus on the number 5 starting gate, Chasing Mo Money, and watch what happens right out of the gate. He veers in a little bit, the number 4 veers out and also breaks about a length ahead of him, and this horse just gets knocked sideways by then a rival to his outside, bumping him. Not an ideal start, especially considering that this horse is a first-time starter. That's a bad gate experience for a first-time starter to have. And he finds himself towards the back of the pack early. He actually was in about 10th place as they made the bend onto the main part of the course from that chute. And also, as he tries to move up into that clubhouse turn, you'll notice that he has nobody ahead of him. So there's nobody to kind of get this horse to relax behind, and he's just racing with no cover. And what we mean by no cover is that there's no horse for this one to follow. So he's just got daylight and clear racetrack ahead of him. And typically inexperienced horses, especially on the turf, they do better when they can have that cover, sort of find another horse to follow, relax in behind that horse, and then produce the sprint finish that is typically so effective on the turf. But without having that cover, you can see that this horse sort of finds himself making this move from 10th place, heading onto the main part of the course, to now when they're getting to the half-mile pole, at about the halfway point of this race, he's moved all the way up into second while racing on the outside. And like I was mentioning at the start of this replay, this was another race where I think being on the inside was an advantage. Who were the super effective finishers in this race? The number 11, the number 12, the number 9, they're all riding the rail. They finished second, third, and fourth. The eventual winner is the number 1, who was riding the rail at the start of the far turn. He'll swing widest of all into the stretch, but he was a bit of an outlier in this race, making this wide run because he was a heavy favorite. Not a big surprise that that horse was able to overcome what might have been a slight track bias. But even if there was no bias, the trip that the number 5, Chasing Mo Money, got is still not ideal. And you can see right here, Flavien Prat kind of realizes that the trip did not go as planned. He's beat. He kind of eases him up to the finish line, ultimately finishing 6th in this race. Like I said, this was a first-time starter, so tough to overcome the kind of trip that he got, given that this was his first racetrack experience. He's a horse that was getting a pretty late start to his career, a runner that was purchased for $250,000 as a yearling, not making his debut until 3 years later now as a 4-year-old gelding. So there have obviously been some obstacles that have prevented this horse from getting to the racetrack in a timely fashion. But I think Chad Brown placed this horse at a realistic level. He seems like the type that has the talent to win a $40,000 maiden claimer likely next time out if it gets into a similar spot. Just the trip didn't work out for him. But if he's able to make adjustments, break a little better next time, and get a trip that is more conducive to success on the turf, I think this is a horse that will be able to have success in his next start, likely at a decent price, given this unremarkable looking first debut that is a lot better than it appears when you watch the replay. Well, those are all the horses to watch for this week. If you want to follow any of these horses moving forward, as I always say, you can add them to your horse watch on DRF.com to get email notifications when these horses run back. Also go into your DRF formulator or Timeform USPPs, open up that notes field, and you can make your own written trip notes about these trips or other trips that you see. And those notes that you make will show up in the past performances when these horses are entered back in the future. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to Horses to Watch this week. I'll be back with another batch of replays to analyze next week.
Hey, let me give you a hot tip. If you liked the content that you've seen before, click on the like and subscribe button right here. And of course, for more DRF videos like Race of the Days, Stakes previews, click on the videos right here.